Have you ever driven by an old church, an old house, a general store in the country, and thought to yourself, if those walls could talk, what would they say? Well, if you're that type of person who thinks about this stuff, you are in luck. Welcome to this episode of So I Married a Mennonite. Now, my husband is the 8th generation to live right here at Herzog Homestead, which was originally called the Metzler Plantation. This barn behind me was started in 1760. Do you know who was in charge of Pennsylvania in 1760? It was King George III. You know the guy in the show Hamilton, and he goes completely berserk and he actually goes like legally mad and they lock him up and he loses his kingship? That's the guy who lost this joint. We're gonna be talking about all the family background, the family dirt, and all of the things that make our barn unique to our family.
As Kristen said, this is a Sweitzer barn. It was called a Sweitzer barn because Sweitzer means Swiss. So these barns, if you go to Switzerland, you can find these same type of barns dotting the countryside here. And in Lancaster County, these sorts of barns were well known. You can find them everywhere in Lancaster. This is one of the older ones. You'll see it's noted most notably by what they call a forebay, or sometimes in PA German, an overden. This is a part that hangs out over the front of the barn about 8 to 10 feet, and they were able to store their bags of grain and hay and keep everything dry in rain and the winter. So this is one of the stables that was originally on this farm. This was a horse stable. We know that when you look here and you see all this rub, a horse went in here and rubbed these down over the years and really wore them down. So this is a part of the stable, and you can see these pegs hanging here. Now this board was added later when we had a store in this area, and so these boards, this is where they would hang harnesses. One other thing to note, if you can like go up to the ceiling here, you'll notice that what holds up the barn floor are the old axe-hewn beams. This beam in particular is called a summer beam. It literally goes the entire length of the barn. The barn is about 80 feet long. It's 2 different trees that make up the summer beam, and it is the central beam that holds up the barn floor of this barn. Many of the beams in here are axe hewn, and you can just see that they would have done this by hand, pulled out of the fields here at the farm. I want to show you something unique, Kristen, about this barn. Right here, if you can zoom in on it, it says S. Metzler. Well, if we go back into history, the second Jacob Metzler had 5 children. One of them was a Samuel Metzler, and he carved his name here when he was a teenager growing up on this farm before he left to go fight in the Civil War. He fought as part of the Illinois Cavalry and was a veterinarian, so he didn't actually do fighting, he took care of the horses on it. So it's kind of a fascinating story that his name is right here, and it makes this barn come alive with this etching just a little bit. So this horseshoe would have been put up by my great uncles, Jacob Elmer, most likely, maybe Daniel Booth. And horseshoes, not uncommon on this farm. However, they would often be hung as a symbol of good luck. So we're in an area of the barn that we often refer to as Dad's shop. My father used this as a shop growing up, but it was a machine shop where they would store some machinery and so on. Over here, Kristen, I want to show you. Look at all these names. From the 1960s, we have a list of names that are just initials, SMO, AMO, BMO. This stands for Benjamin Oberholzer. Elva, this has been on our show numerous times over the past. These are all her uncles and her father that's listed here. They work in the summer and they record their names as they worked on the farm and helped here in the summer.
They were like leaving their mark.
They were leaving their mark. And this has never been painted over since then. So as Kristen told you earlier, my family was not the first family to move onto this farm. And my ancestor wasn't even the one that built the barn. That was a history reserved to a guy named Peter Meyer. However, my family, when they moved on in 1786, had a pretty big influence. Not only did he continue to farm this land and take care of the property, his plantation as he called it, but the graveyard that's sitting behind me is the original family graveyard where all my ancestors are buried. The church attached to it came off this property in the early 1800s. And then the one-room school, as we did an episode on, about 1850, came off the property after that. They all bear the Metzler name, which my ancestors are Metzlers. This silo was built in 1954, was built by Jake and Elmer Buch, but they did not build it alone. They had the help of neighbors. As many farms in this area did, neighbors relied on each other, and it was no different for this farm. Elva's grandfather helped build this block silo behind us. It's unique in that this is a curved block silo that you don't see too often in this area. It's about 30 feet high. When it was built, this was when silage was coming into its own here, where the farmers would actually take the corn, harvest it when it was green, grind it up, and make silage. Silage could feed animals throughout the winter. One of the ways silage works is it's fermented corn. Think of it that way. And it produces this gas. Well, the first year or two they were actually made silage. Jake and Elmer Buch didn't quite know what they were doing, and some of them almost passed out from the silo gas because it can be toxic to humans.
So is it kind of like your high?
Probably a little bit worse, but probably not terribly far off either. Behind me is the double Dutch barn doors. You can see both of them open up. This is kind of level out onto the floor here, but at one time this barn had a steeper ramp going up into it, which I'm going to show you a little bit later.
Okay guys, this is actually our wedding venue. We turned this into a wedding venue about 10 years ago. So Scott's gonna tell us about the inside of the Sweitzer barn.
Yeah.
Let's hit it!
All right. Here's what's amazing about this barn. The floor that I'm standing on was originally a threshing floor. They would bring in wheat and thresh it. In fact, Kristen,
yes,
this door here would open up, right? So not only do we have this incredible view out over the farm here, which we can show you here in a little bit, but the wind would come in here and it would blow the chaff when they were like beating the grain and beating the wheat and loosening the grains from the stalk. It would blow that out the Dutch doors here in the back. What's really amazing about this floor is though, in 1760, all they had were horses and cattle that would bring stuff into the barn. This floor has held up as we become more mechanized, and we've driven heavy machinery and tractors on this floor. We've had dancing on this floor because of weddings, and this floor is as solid as the time it was built.
Really incredible if you think about it.
It is. So some other things, Kristen, if you can just swivel around to here.
Swiveling.
Swiveling. This feed bag is probably about 50, 60 years old. This feed bag came from a place called C.P. Wenger's, existed in Ephrata for years, and it's where we got feed ground growing up here for our cattle on the farm. And this is one of their bags that's still existing here to this day. If we can shift over here, Kristen, I want to show you this. This is a place in the barn called the Granary. Now, we'll show you this in a little bit. This barn used to be about 60 feet long, right? 30 by 60 feet. And this corner of the barn was the southernmost corner of the barn. The sun would hit that, making this very warm. This granary, where they stored grain, was perfect because the heat would help dry the grain and preserve it for the cattle as winter came on and they needed to feed the animals out of this storehouse. They would store wheat, grain, soybeans, corn, would all get stored here.
So when you say it all gets stored here, what do you mean based upon the architecture of these?
There were slats that were in here. You see this hole right up here, this little thing right here, that's where it would be dumped down. They would fill it up and they would put the grain right in here. It would get stored and they would shovel it out as they needed. So each one of those has a little hole in the ceiling that allows it to happen. When we first moved on here, my dad used these yet for that purpose. So right above me is one of those slats. Chris and I were working around the granary one day and we discovered the slat. It had the name Jacob Metzler. That's the name of my original ancestor that lived here on the farm. It's pretty incredible. It's the only thing we have with his name, minus family Bible or two that we have floating around. But it has his name on it, which meant that he took the time to etch it in there. This is his way of leaving his imprint on this farm. You'll also notice below that little board, there's a date, 1813 DP. This is a year after my original ancestor died and his son and Maria Metzler, the ghost we talked about in the past episode, took over the farm. The farm was already in existence. That DP stands for date plastered. It's a date they put the plaster on. So that plaster behind me is over 200 years old. Earlier, I talked about the forebay and how it was used to protect grain. One of the ways it would get the corn from this granary I showed you earlier and the hay bales and the haystacks here down to the cattle. Lift this up.
Please don't die.
Yeah, they would lift it up and throw it straight down. Can you see this, Kristen? So straight down in, they would just drop it right in.
So they would drop the hay down?
Yep, and then they would gather it up and take it down to the cattle. When this farm was built in 1760, these parts of the barn, these trusses, these beams that are going up, this was put together first, and then they would take horses and lift them up with ropes to straighten them up and make them go straight up and down. One of the ways they knew what part went with what are these marks right here. Kristen, can you see these 3 marks?
I see the marks.
And there's these 2 notches.
Notches.
Let me show you this. Over here, this beam was marked. It's missing now for our weddings. But over here, you saw that was a 3. This one is a 1. So this is the first beam with 2 notches. But it gets even better, Kristen.
Oh, it's getting better.
Come here.
Goodness.
I want to show you. Here,
He's not
this
excited
beam,
at all.
this
Yes.
beam number 2 here,
Yes.
look, has 3 notches. Do you know why?
Why?
It's the 3rd wall. This is 3, this is 2.
He's
all
so
the way over
excited.
here, right here,
Yes.
1 notch, because
One
it's a
notch.
first wall. If you want to go all the way up to the roof, I don't know if you can see it, Kristen, but there are cedar shingles on here. Now, these cedar shingles have had sheet metal put over them, and there's a second roof over it. We've kept these cedar shingles because we believe it to be the original roof that was on the barn. We can't guarantee that they didn't replace it sometime in the 1800s, but that means that these cedar shingles could be potentially about 200 plus years old. Pretty amazing. Now, the reason they obviously were covered is you can see that there's holes and gaps in them, but it's kind of nice to look up and see the original barn roof in there. Now, I want to show you one more thing since we're talking about the roof. So the reason the roof right above me has no shingles on it has to do with 1980. I remember it clearly. I was standing in our living room watching this voracious storm blow trees around and everything, and I'm looking out the barn roof, and one moment the barn roof is there, and the next it's gone. Literally, this windstorm came through, ripped part of the barn roof off. Everything else stayed standing, but it ripped the barn roof off, and literally right where you see the cedar shingles stop, that's where the roof remained.
What did Dad Herzog have to say as the owner and the incurrence of cost?
I know. Well, we did have insurance. All I remember is our neighbor's roof, Ruben's roof, was blown into the middle of the road. This roof was gone. One of the corn cribs was all twisted in. It was an interesting storm. It literally lifted this roof, carried it up over the barn into the cornfield. This has a secret door. Now, this secret door was put in recently, about 6-7 years ago. We had Lee Souter, who's done tons of work on this farm, not a relative of mine, although we've tried to trace that back. And he put this secret door in. It's right here. It blends in with the wall. When people are here for weddings, it always surprises them it's here. But right here, Kristen, here is the door. And so we use this to allow people to come up the back way into this event venue. It allows caterers to come up and feed the people at the various tables. And on a rainy day wedding, what happens, Kristen?
This becomes the place where the bride and her father come up and they walk up to the gray limestone wall to get married. People are always terrified when it's a rainy day for their wedding, but the pictures always look so good.
They look pretty incredible. In fact, the wall that you're focused on right now, Kristen, notice those slits in there. They allow ventilation into the barn and allow for this barn to dry the tobacco that was in it. This was a tobacco barn from the 1850s when Jacob Metzler III began raising tobacco, all the way up to 1978 when tobacco stopped being raised on this farm. My father stopped raising tobacco because my grandfather died of emphysema on my mom's side. And so I think it became a health thing. He said, you know what? This kills people. I'm uncomfortable with it. I'm not going to continue to raise it, even though it's an incredible cash crop these days. See all the tobacco rails over there, and they would use them to space them out and to hang tobacco on tobacco laths here. So as I mentioned, this farm has a lot of good ventilation. I want to show you one of the other ventilation pieces, Kristen.
Okay.
I think you should come follow me, you Jersey girl.
What are you doing?
Come here. Come
no
here.
way.
Come here, follow me.
No, get off. Scott, I'm serious. Oh my gosh.
What?
Stop. There's no,
You can't even, you want to come over here to see me?
I don't know what you're doing up there.
Right.
Honestly.
I'm going to show you where there's ventilation.
No, come down.
Yeah, come here.
We don't need to see the ventilation.
We do. We need to see this ventilation. You need to come over here so you can see me better.
Scott, please. Please, please, please.
Here.
It's time to come down now, farm boy.
No. Here, look. This opens up. Look at the ventilation.
Seriously. You are not 15, Scott. Oh my God. All right, let me go outside and get the ridiculousness from there.
Okay.
Oh, guys, you know, once a farm boy, always a farm boy, these guys, you know. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of So I Married a Mennonite. You know, if we don't learn from the past, if we're not willing to go back and think about the things and the people who came before us, it changes the way that we look towards the future. So I, for one, am honored to have been a part of this family and this legacy now for 27 years. Oh my word, we have been married that long, guys. It's been a great ride. It continues to be so. Tune in for the next episode of So I Married a Mennonite. If you haven't done so already, would you please like and subscribe to this channel? Thanks for watching and take care.